which is Azure storage. Azure में storage services है to store the data, and now we are going to talk about them. What are those Azure storage services?
Amar, we are going to cover theory part all first or one by one we
Yeah,
are
I
going
mean
for lab.
in Azure fundamental, this is Azure fundamental. It is going. Okay.
Okay.
So in Azure fundamental, complete theory. So by tomorrow, I mean in tomorrow first half, we are going to complete this fundamental. All the theoretical is going to complete it. And once fundamental get completed, we will go for the administration part where we are going to do the practice of
Okay.
all these things.
Okay.
So we have next thing is Azure storage. Azure storage, we have different type of storage. Azure storage can be used to store file, messages, and tables. Okay. These Azure is massively scalable, highly durable, and highly available, and also secure. Okay. So these are the some characteristic of Azure storage services. And if we talk about storage services, so we have a different types of data that would be supported by these storage services. One is the structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data. Structured data is what we have in a table format. This is a structured data. In structured data, we could have some kind of a schema, okay, which has a rigid format, and whatever the data we are storing in that are the relational data. So you might have seen that you have some kind of MySQL is kind of example of a structured data. We have a semi-structured data. So this is the semi-structured data. So basically you might have seen the CSV XML JSON format. That is the semi-structured data. And finally, we have unstructured data. Basically these file type PDF, AVI, document, JPG size. These are the unstructured data. So we can store any kind of data within the Azure storage services. We have blob storage, we have disk storage, we have file storage, we have table storage, and we have queue storage services. Okay, so blob storage is for unstructured data. So if you have any kind of unstructured data, you can go for the blob storage. So you can see here blob storage. So in blob storage, Azure is supporting blob storage services, and blob storage services is for unstructured data, which is highly scalable, and this is a Microsoft recommended storage services. Okay, that's a blob storage. In blob storage, we can use to store the data if we have streaming audio or video, or if you want to take the backup of image or document, we can go for blob storage services. We have another type of storage, which is called disk storage. And if you want to store operating system, so we can go for the disk storage. Okay. So as you can see, there are two disk is showing over here. One is this disk which is storing the operating system, and there is another disk which is storing the data. Okay. So these disk storage can directly attach to the virtual machine. So if you have virtual machine, you can attach the disk storage on this. We have next type of storage services, which is file storage services. So we could have a shared file system in the Azure where we just want to store the file. Okay, if we want to lift and shift a particular size file, so we can go for file storage services. And there are different type of file storage services that we do provide by Microsoft Azure. One is the very good example of accessing these file storage services via SMP. So basically there is the network shared. So for network shared, we can go for the file storage services. You can see this is the file storage services. You could have a storage account. Within that storage account, there could be shared, okay, for admin or for media. These are the red directory, and these are the file which is storing in this directory. So file storage is nothing but this is network type of storage. You would be accessing the network storage in this way, right? You are giving the storage path and through which you can access the file storage services. The next we have storage tier. Storage tier is what? How long your data would be stored in the storage. Okay. And for which purpose? For that we have storage tiers. So basically we have blob storage, hot storage, cold storage, and archive storage. So these are the storage tiers we have. Hot storage. If we are using very frequently any data, that is data would be stored in the hot storage. So here is the properties mentioned right here. This is the hot storage tiers, optimized for frequently accessed data. Okay. So if their data is active, you are accessing very frequently, you can go for hot storage. For hot storage, this is a highest storage cost. When you are storing data over here, the cost is for storage is a very high, but to access that data, the cost is very low. Okay. So I would say in this way, let's say you have a data which you are using very frequently and you store in some storage over here in any disk. So for this disk, the data which you have stored, this is very costly, but when you are going to access it, the access cost is low. The access cost is low, but storage cost is very high. This is for the hot storage. If you go for any other type of storage over here, let me clean this. Cool storage. This is optimized for infrequently accessed data. Data which you would use in the interval of 30 days. Okay. So that for that you can go for the cold storage. And then finally we have archival storage, which is basically rarely we are going to access that data, but the storage is really important. So we have archival storage. So you can see here the life cycle. For the blob storage life cycle, you can see. Let's say you have any data which you are very frequently accessing. That data would go into the hot storage. But let's say that in the same data, some of the data you are not accessing till the 30 days. So that data would move into the cool storage. And let's say if you haven't accessed that data more than 30 days, so that data would go to archival storage. And if you haven't accessed your data for 180 days, so that data got deleted. So that's how you can set the life cycle of your data. So especially I would say the backup. I would give the example of backup. Okay. Basically, let's say you have a router, and for that router, you are taking the configuration backup. First of all, that data would go here on hot storage. This remain 30 days over here on hot storage. But as soon as 30 days passed and you haven't accessed that configuration backup till that 30 days, that data would move to cool storage, where you have to pay less charges for that storage. Okay. And let's say you haven't accessed that configuration file till 30 days, that went to archival storage for 180 days for 6 months. It is going to reside over here. And if you haven't accessed that configuration file for next 6 months, then that configuration file is going to be deleted. So what is the benefit of that? The benefit of that, let's say in between, there is something happen to this router and you need to, take the backup of 30 days or maybe 180 days old backup you just need to restore on this router. Yes, you can do that. You can get from the archival storage. But when you are accessing that data from the archival storage, for accessing of that data, you have to pay more, but not for the storage. The data which is stored here, that is a less cost. But when you are accessing that data, when you try to retrieve that data, for that you have to pay high cost. Okay, so that is the storage life cycle. This is the storage life cycle. Okay, so you could have a 3 state of your data. One is the hot state. Okay, which is in very frequently accessed data. One is the cool state, and other could be archival state, and finally it could be delete. It going to be deleted. Any question on this?
So Azure will automatically delete after 180 or
Yeah, you can create a policy on your
policy?
storage. You can create a policy that
Okay.
it's
Or if
not like 30 days. You can increase
i-
or decrease that.
if user will not create any policy, in that case, what will be the default nature?
It
It will
it's a default nature. It's a default nature.
it will delete. Okay.
Yeah. And this policy you can apply where? On blob storage, blob type of storage. Okay. Blob is a storage type. Okay. If you want to store any unstructured data, you can store here on the blob. Okay. Blob storage, I'm just comparing with AWS. In AWS, we have Bitbucket. Okay. Here we have blob storage in Azure. So if you want to store unstructured data, you can store in the here on blob storage. And on that blob storage, you can create a life cycle policy. Any frequently accessed data would be part of hot access. Any infrequent data access would be part of your pool access. And then if you are not accessing, rarely accessing that data, that would be going on a archival storage. Okay, now moving to next. Now we are going to talk about Azure databases. So earlier we talked about storage. There is a difference between storage and database. What is the basic difference between storage and database? Whatever data you are putting in the databases, basically that is a structured data. Okay, but in storage there could be unstructured data. So now we are talking about databases. So here we are going to talk about a database which is not installed on the operating system, but this database you are using as a platform as a services. Okay.
अमर एक्सक्यूज मी, आप कितना
Yeah.
कवर करने वाले हो टॉपिक आज अभी? और
5 minutes. This database only.
okay, actually I have just suddenly urgency, have to go, so that's why asking. No problem, for 5 minutes I'll be continue, no problem.
Okay. So I'm talking about platform as a services on the database. You have a two option for any database. First, you purchase a machine, a virtual machine. On this virtual machine, you install the operating system, then install the database software. This is the one option you have. Okay. The another option you have, you just purchase the database services. Service. And this database service is known as a PaaS. That is a platform as a services. Okay. This is basically infrastructure as services you have purchased, and this you have purchased platform as a services. So here we are going to talk about platform as a services. Okay. When you take any platform as a services or database, which is fully managed database, you can manage fully. And this is by default built-in high availability. When you are purchasing any PaaS-based database services, you don't need to worry about high availability. Usually what happens in VM, we have to deploy any another VM for achieving the high availability of this database. But when you are taking the PaaS services, you don't need to deploy any other VM, right? You can use the same, same service for high availability as well. So we have different types of database that is supported by Azure. We have Cosmos databases, Azure SQL databases, Azure database for MySQL, Azure database for PostGRE, and Azure SQL managed instances you can purchase. So any kind of database services you can purchase that is supported by Azure. Cosmos DB, which is globally distributed multi-model database services, scale throughput and storage on the across the Azure region. This is the high availability. Okay, and it automatically replicate data it automatically replicate data closest to the user. That means, let's say if you have a user over here, you have taken the Cosmos database services. So automatically replication would be happen. There would be another database would be created, and replication would be happen between them. If this database is down, user would be connected to another database services over here, and this would be seamlessly. This would be not, uh, you know, not visible to the user. So this kind of database we are using for web, mobile, gaming, IoT application. This is Cosmos database. We have another type of database services, and that is called Azure SQL database. This is a relational database services. Okay. This is a fully manageable. That means user can fully manage. If user want to delete any table, add any table on this, yes, it can do that. Even though user want to delete the database, it can delete the database. And typical use case of this database is HR database. The next we have Azure MySQL. Okay, again, this is a relational database services. Okay, but this is a open source. This is not a Microsoft SQL. This is a MySQL. This is open source database services, which is high available, and you can use this database services where you just want to perform automatic backup. We have PostgreSQL database services. Again, this is a relational database services. So I mean to say that in Azure, there are all the platform database available, which you would see usually on premises. You can purchase any kind of database services instead of deploying that database on the top of operating system. SQL managed instances we have. This is fully managed PaaS services, and you can lift and shift your databases from your on-premises to any SQL-based database instances. So that's all we had for today.